or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the August 28th issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to start off with an article left over from yesterday. From the opinion page, Ascendant no more. Democrats are a coalition of the pathetic. The party's base and its ideological vanguard consist of downwardly mobile college graduates, by Matthew Continetti. After winning Michigan's Democratic Senate primary, Abdul El-Sayed received a phone call from Barack Obama. The nominee was thrilled. He told NBC's Meet the Press that he hopes Mr. Obama will join him on the trail. His presence here in Michigan would mean so much to the coalition that helped elect him. Where that coalition stands today is an open question. At first, it seems as if the same groups that powered Mr. Obama's rise, young people, minorities, and white voters with college degrees, are behind Mr. El-Sayed's. But looks can be deceiving. The Wolverine state has changed since Mr. Obama's victories in 2008 and 2012, and the Democratic Party has too. What commentator Ronald Brownstein famously dubbed Mr. Obama's coalition of the ascendant is being torn apart by socialist, anti-Israel, and downwardly mobile voters who are nominating candidates like Mr. El-Sayed. Mr. Brownstein's theory was that because the demographic groups with which Mr. Obama was popular, millennials, minorities, and the college educated, were growing as a share of the population, Democrats would have an enduring advantage over Republicans. Mr. Obama's re-election proved it. Yet the coalition of the ascendant soon lost altitude. Population growth isn't proportional to voter turnout. In 2008, more than a third of the country was non-white, and non-white voters made up 24% of the electorate. By 2024, non-whites had risen to more than 40% of the population. The non-white share of the electorate ticked up only to 28%. The Hispanic share rose by only 2 points. Young voters, meanwhile, get old. Mr. Obama won 66% of 18 to 29-year-olds in 2008. In 2024, that same cohort, now 34 to 45, narrowed the partisan divide. Kamala Harris outpolled Donald Trump among 30 to 39-year-olds by only 6 points, and the 40-something vote was evenly split. Democrats assumed that Hispanics would become as reliably partisan as blacks and Jews. Instead, they are a crucial swing vote. In 2008, Mr. Obama won their votes by 36 points. But in 2024, Ms. Harris's margin was a mere 5. That Hispanics are trending away from Mr. Trump isn't evidence of demographic destiny. Swing voters swing. What has replaced the coalition of the ascendant is a coalition of the pathetic. Very online millennials and Zoomers with college and graduate degrees, few prospects, and far out beliefs. They take their cues from Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, New York Mayor Zoran Mandani, and the Democratic Socialist of America. They want to cut off aid to Israel, abolish private health insurance and immigration enforcement, nix the Electoral College and even the Senate, pack the Supreme Court, and grant statehood to Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. Establishment Democrats want to harness its energy while encouraging it to become more moderate. Good luck. The problem facing Democratic leaders is that the rise of socialism worsens tensions within the remnant of the coalition of the ascendant. The class divisions over socialism and anti-Zionism are clear from Mr. Mandani's victory in last year's New York City Democratic primary and from Mr. El-Sayed's win in Michigan. Mr. Mandani fared poorly in working-class strongholds such as Staten Island and the Bronx, while winning far-left upscale areas in Brooklyn and immigrant neighborhoods in Queens. Mr. El-Sayed cleaned up in Washtenaw County, home of the University of Michigan, while losing majority black Detroit and working-class Macomb County. Grievance drives the new socialism, outrage that their educational credentials haven't delivered them wealth and status. According to Nate Silver, Americans with advanced degrees and incomes of $30,000 to $60,000 are the most Democratic voting bloc. The three largest self-described occupations in the 2021 DSA member survey were unemployed, disabled, retired 15%, white collar 13%, and teacher, scholar, academic 10%. The well-credentialed are likely to push post-material causes such as climate alarmism, transgenderism, defunding the police, and opposition to Israel. But the ideas that motivate the new coalition repel parts of the old one. The greatest difference between the Democrats' two coalitions may be mental. Mr. Obama's coalition of the ascendant looked to a post-racial future of national unity and progress. For all his faults, Mr. Obama never wavered in his view that there is nothing wrong with America that democracy can't fix. For the coalition of the pathetic, however, America is beyond repair. Our history is irredeemable. Our country is unexceptional. Its people are deplorable. It's time for revolution, for a fundamental overhaul of our constitutional structure, economic organization, and way of life. Not exactly a positive message. No wonder many Democrats are leery of Mr. Mandani, Mr. El-Sayed, and their comrades. An anti-incumbent mood may be enough for Democrats to win in November. If it isn't, blame the coalition of the pathetic. America's Spiraling National Debt by William A. Galston. Last week's announcement that U.S. government debt has reached $40 trillion triggered alarm in global financial markets, and the rise of long-term interest rates to their highest level since 2007 intensified this concern. To bring down interest rates, the U.S. Treasury Department announced that it would double its purchases of long-term government securities, a tactic investors dismiss as a band-aid on a bullet hole, according to the Financial Times. Predictably, this policy worked for one day before interest rates resumed their rise. Adding to the pressure, tech giants, which until recently financed their investments using internal cash flow, are now turning to the corporate bond market to borrow the massive sums they need to build data centers for artificial intelligence. Secretary Scott Bessent argues that bond yields don't reflect the underlying fundamentals. Unfortunately for him, the famous bond vigilantes don't agree, and they are right. We are going to grow our way out of mounting government debt, a talking point the Secretary resuscitated last week. Nor is there a very good chance, as he also argued, that the U.S. government deficit has peaked. Unless we change fiscal course, the Congressional Budget Office projects that the annual deficit will rise from 5.8% of gross domestic product to 6.7% over the next decade, and we will add an additional $24 trillion to the debt held by the public. Deficits beget more debt, which increases deficits, which raise the debt level even further. Over the next decade, annual interest payments on the national debt will rise from $1 trillion to $2.1 trillion, or from 3.3% to 4.6% of GDP. By 2036, about 2/3 of our annual borrowing will be used to make interest payments on Treasury securities, an ominous trend known as the debt spiral. These projections are based on current policy, but they could get worse. The Trump administration is calling for a major increase in annual defense spending without proposing a realistic way to pay for it. Whatever the merits of this proposal, it would add trillions of dollars to our swollen national debt over the next decade. For decades, deficit hawks have argued that we can't go on this way indefinitely. It turns out that indefinitely has lasted longer than we expected. Another confirmation of Adam Smith's quip that there is a great deal of ruin in a nation. But the recent tremors in global markets suggest that we are dangerously close to the end of the extended grace period we have enjoyed. Republicans attribute budget deficits to excessive spending, while Democrats blame tax cuts. Both sides have a point. In 2001, after 4 straight years of budget surpluses, the CBO released a 10-year forecast projecting that the national debt would be eliminated by 2009. This didn't happen. Combined with slower than expected economic growth, the Bush tax cuts reduced income tax receipts from a projected $1.8 trillion in 2011 to $1.2 trillion. During the same period, outlays to pay for long wars in the Middle East and programs to soften the blow of the Great Recession increased discretionary spending in 2011 from a projected $900 billion to $1.3 trillion. Meanwhile, revenue for Social Security and Medicare fell short of projections by $300 billion, while outlays exceeded them by $200 billion. Developments such as 2011 mirror this pattern of lower revenue from tax cuts and unexpected economic disruptions coupled with higher spending for wars and safety net programs. If we are serious about repairing our unsustainable fiscal policy, the administration should propose, and Congress should enact, a surtax on individual and corporate taxes to pay for whatever increases in defense spending Congress and the administration agree upon. Ever rising deficits and debt will undermine our global standing as much as military weakness will. We must also stabilize the safety net. By the end of the next president's first term, Social Security will run out of cash reserves to pay full retirement benefits for tens of millions of retirees, leading to across-the-board cuts of more than 20% for current and future beneficiaries. For decades, administrations and lawmakers have avoided the difficult discussions needed to reach a solution. Now we have run out of time, and the required changes will be larger and more abrupt. Well in advance of the looming 2032 deadline, Congress and the administration should convene a bipartisan commission to produce balanced proposals for stabilizing the system. Finally, soaring medical costs are gobbling up family and government budgets. To prevent the health sector from becoming the black hole into which everything else disappears, we need to discuss structural changes in healthcare delivery and finance. Medicare for all isn't the solution, but we need a responsible alternative that meets the scope of the problem. It will be difficult to stanch the flow of red ink, but the alternative, an ever-growing debt that saps our economic vitality, would be far worse. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Now for the highlights under Business and Finance. NVIDIA paused some deals in a new financing initiative that offered credit support to artificial intelligence cloud providers in exchange for a share of revenue. Investors confident of tech's prospects helped drive up major U.S. stock indexes, lifting the S&P 500, NASDAQ, and Dow Industrials by 0.7%, 1.6%, and 0.2% respectively. A federal judge ruled the Trump administration violated Anthropic's First Amendment rights by blacklisting the company as a supply chain risk. Boston Fed President Susan Collins said she could support raising interest rates at a future meeting if data show inflation isn't declining in line with her expectations. The Abu Dhabi Royal, sometimes referred to as the Spy Sheikh, is a major shareholder backing a new U.S. bank the Trump family's crypto venture is preparing to launch. Kalshi said it aims to broaden its weather predictions markets with meteorological know-how from Weather Company, which now verifies outcomes on climate trades. Barrett Zapf, the Thinking Machines Lab co-founder, who abruptly defected to OpenAI this year, will now join Alphabet's Google as a vice president of research. DeepSeek is set to secure new funding that would value the Chinese artificial intelligence startup at $74 billion, building its war chest as it aims for an IPO next year. Nokia and SanDisk plan to invest more than $31 billion in Japan to boost memory chip production. Best Buy raised its full-year outlook, prompted by higher second quarter sales, which grew across categories that include computing and home theater. Pernod Ricard said fading interest in alcohol in the U.S. would contribute to weigh on sales, offsetting growth in other markets. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. Some U.S. companies with close ties to Trump are taking steps to gain favor with Democrats, worried that they will become targets if Republicans lose control of the House. Federal aviation officials found that 2 air traffic controllers left work early before an Air Canada regional jet crashed into a fire truck at LaGuardia Airport in March. Investigators said the temporary relocation of Marine One's landing zone due to White House construction was a factor in a safety incident involving the helicopter carrying the president. Trump signed an executive order to change the name of Lake Ontario to Lake America in a further escalation of the U.S. trade dispute with Canada. The Trump administration is in advanced talks with Venezuela for the U.S. to take a direct stake in more than a dozen oil fields that house nearly 1/3 of the country's energy reserves. A federal judge issued a temporary restraining order that stops the government from implementing new rules upending mail-in voting procedures ahead of midterm elections. The Trump administration curtailed the ability of international students to complete internships before they graduate, which may hasten enrollment declines. The U.S. and Canadian governments and businesses in both countries are bracing for a prolonged trade row that could last until after the midterm elections. A Republican push to prosecute Dr. Anthony Fauci for contempt of Congress has stalled as the Trump administration questions whether the legal approach supports an indictment. Federal authorities are preparing charges against a U.S. service member suspected of placing poly-market bets on military operations that earned him more than $1 million. Died Ratko Mladic, 84, former Bosnian Serb general, convicted of genocide for his role in the 90s Yugoslav wars. The picture on today's front page shows many apartment and business buildings sitting in flooded, muddy water. And that headline, more than 1,450 missing in Himalayan floods. The caption, deluge. Houses lie covered in sludge in Devano in Nepal's Nuwatkat district on Thursday, a day after the area was hit by a giant wave likely triggered by a broken glacier. At least 390 people died, and dozens of U.S. tourists remain missing. The article More than 1,450 missing from floods. Hundreds dead. Fallen glacier suspected of sending torrents through Nepal, China. By Trippi Lahari, Krishna Pokharel, and Akash Hassan. More than 389 people have been found dead in Nepal, according to Nepalese police and disaster officials, while Chinese authorities have confirmed 3 deaths. More than 500 foreign tourists are among the 900 people missing in Nepal. These include around 65 Americans and 180 Indians, according to a Nepal official coordinating rescue efforts for travelers. About 550 people are missing in China, almost half of them foreign tourists, according to Chinese state news reports. According to the leading theory scientists are focused on, a vast quantity of rock and ice fell from around 16,000 feet, possibly from a glacier falling off, and plunged 4,000 feet into the valley below. The fall turned the ice into a monstrous wave of water that made its way to nearby rivers and washed ferociously through towns and villages in China and Nepal, depositing people as far as 150 miles away. Other articles from the front page follow. 2 controllers cut out early before deadly LaGuardia crash, by Andrew Tangel. Federal aviation officials have found that 2 air traffic controllers left work early before an Air Canada regional jet crashed into a fire truck at LaGuardia Airport in March. The Federal Aviation Administration is moving to fire the 2 controllers who officials determined had left about an hour before their shifts ended on March 22nd, people familiar with the matter said. As a result, 2 controllers remaining at the LaGuardia Tower didn't have backup to assist with high workloads. The busy New York City airport was handling more than twice the usual volume of traffic the night of the accident. 2 pilots died in the runway collision, and 6 other people, including a crew member, passengers, and workers on the ground, sustained serious injuries, according to the National Transportation Safety Board. Leaving early is called an early shove, according to current and former controllers, and is a long-standing practice in the industry. FAA officials consider it a form of time card fraud. The push to fire the controllers signals an aggressive response to the practice by the Trump administration. Current and former controllers said managers have often condoned their leaving before their shifts officially end, and it is seen as an informal perk after busy stretches working air traffic. The agency has taken steps this year to terminate more than 10 controllers for alleged time card fraud or abuse of leave policies, according to people familiar with the matter. The FAA said in April that it had about 11,000 fully certified air traffic controllers, with 4,000 more in training. The vast majority of air traffic controllers are great patriots. They show up for work, complete their full shift, and come back and do it all again, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said in a statement. But when a small percentage of individuals take advantage of the American taxpayer, unfairly add additional work to their fellow controllers, and impact the airspace We have no choice but to act. We will not tolerate fraud. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. President's corporate donors now court Democrats. Tech firms fear GOP might lose House. They are preparing for potential probes. By Annie Linsky and Emily Glazer. Some U.S. companies with close ties to President Trump are taking steps to gain favor with Democrats, worried they will become targets if Republicans lose control of the House. Big tech companies, in particular those that made major donations to Trump's legacy projects, are preparing for congressional and even potential criminal investigations, according to advisors, lobbyists, and board members. Washington-based lawyers and lobbyists said their clients are asking, what are our vulnerabilities? Meta Platforms and others are writing big checks for Democrats ahead of the midterms, according to people familiar with the matter. A counterbalance to the tens of millions of dollars they gave to the White House ballroom and Republican initiatives. Other companies, including Paramount, Skydance, and Kalshi, are hiring former Democratic aides to bolster their government relations efforts. Some companies are creating internal task forces to game out responses to potential congressional inquiries, particularly regarding their substantial financial support for Trump and his political operations, according to people involved in the discussions. Meta and Palantir are among the companies whose executives and advisors have discussed the likelihood they would face requests for information, future congressional hearings, and even subpoenas, people involved in the discussions said. Cooper Thibault, a Silicon Valley donor, advisor, and Democratic strategist, said Democrats could launch a wave of investigations if they take control of the House. His advice to companies who have been politically cozying up to Trump and ignoring Democrats: get right with God. Costa Rican drug violence sparks political turmoil. A bastion of democratic stability faces trafficking surge. By Ian Lovett. Limon, Costa Rica. Once a beacon of democratic stability in a region beset by lawlessness, Costa Rica is facing a surge in drug violence that threatens to upend the country's political system. With homicides up 50% since 2020, putting the country's murder rate on par with Mexico, Costa Rican President Laura Fernandez and her ruling party are blaming the independent judiciary. Why has this turned into a vicious cycle where the police arrest people and the judiciary releases them? Fernandez says shortly after taking office in May. Her battle with the judicial branch has since exploded into a political civil war. Fernandez accused the judiciary of being infiltrated by organized crime, filed a criminal complaint against judges of the Constitutional Court in a fight over judicial appointments, and slashed the judiciary's budget. Judicial branch officials and opposition politicians say Fernandez and her party are making a raw power grab. Throngs of Costa Ricans took to the street this month in a show of support for the judicial branch, waving signs with messages like, "We are afraid of dictatorship," and "Don't touch our independent judiciary." This definitely benefits organized crime, said Carlo Diaz, Costa Rica's Attorney General, adding that proposed cuts to the judiciary's budget could create chaos that would facilitate government decisions aimed at limiting citizens' rights. The fight over how to respond to the security crisis underscores a growing trend across Latin America. Political leaders are increasingly urging voters to give up democratic protections in exchange for promises to end the violence. Until the past few years, drug cartels had little effect on life in Costa Rica, which boasts one of the strongest economies in Latin America with a broad middle class. Tourists fill the arrivals lounge at the airport each day, then head to the pristine beaches or to catch glimpses of sloths in the rainforest. Its stable political system, with robust checks and balances, helps them turn the country into a high-tech manufacturing hub. Still, Costa Rica remained an inviting target for drug traffickers looking to move their product north from South America. NVIDIA fuels new AI hopes. NVIDIA's blowout second quarter results sent the chip maker's shares surging 8.7% on Thursday, their steepest one-day jump since April 2025, adding $442 billion to the company's market value. That rise trails only a $450 billion one-day gain by Microsoft in July, the largest such jump ever. The quarterly report quelled worries over chip demand. Abu Dhabi spy sheik is a major shareholder in Trump's new bank, by Rebecca Ballhaus, Sam Kessler, and Angus Berwick. The Abu Dhabi royal, sometimes referred to as the spy sheik, is a major shareholder backing a new U.S. bank the Trump family's cryptocurrency venture is preparing to launch, according to people familiar with the matter. Sheikh Tahnoon bin Zayed Al Nahyan and co-investors are behind an entity that owns the largest stake, 49%, in the holding company that World Liberty Financial created to house its banking venture, according to people familiar with the matter. The Sheikh last year backed a $500 million investment into World Liberty Financial in exchange for a 49% stake, the Wall Street Journal reported. The offer of the comptroller of the currency this month granted preliminary conditional approval for World Liberty Financial to launch a federally chartered national trust bank to issue, redeem, and safeguard USD1, the dollar-backed stablecoin World Liberty launched last year. The new venture marks an expansion of the business relationship between the Trump-backed crypto company and a foreign government official. Tahnoon serves as the United Arab Emirates National Security Advisor and is brother to the country's president. He oversees a more than $1.3 trillion empire funded by his personal fortune and state money. Stablecoins are pegged to the value of real assets held in reserve. USD1 now has a market value of $4 billion. World Liberty said the dollars backing USD1 are invested in U.S. Treasuries and other cash equivalents, generating an estimated $150 million a year in interest. Previously, World Liberty issued USD1 through BitGo, a trust bank that held the stablecoin's reserves and kept a portion of the interest. The more USD1 in circulation, the more revenue World Liberty can generate from its reserves. World Liberty said it plans for the trust bank to drive mainstream adoption of USD1 and to offer new services to clients, such as holding their crypto for a fee. Thriving, face-licking marmots are spreading terror on the trail. Cute but destructive rodents swipe shoes, snatch backpacks, and guzzle radiator fluid. By Jim Carlton. Mineral King Valley, California. Andrew Reinhardt was so tired after hiking up a mountain pass last month, he laid down for a nap, only to wake to a wet tongue on his ear. A marmot stared back. "It scared the S out of me," said the 28-year-old engineer from Livermore, California. "You don't expect to get licked when you go to sleep in the woods." Welcome to Sequoia National Park, also known as Marmot Country. Yellow-bellied marmots are stalking hikers and campers in a park more famous for its namesake giant trees. They snatch backpacks, swipe shoes, and nibble on trekking poles. Some even chase humans. Jeff White, 66, now ties his shoes together at camp after a marmot stole one on a previous trip. He looked around to find the missing shoe and noticed one of the plump rodents sneaking peeks at him from behind a log. I reached underneath the log, and there was my shoe, the Atascadero, California resident warned before heading out on a multi-day truck. You have to treat your shoes like bear food. But what really put Sequoia on the Marmot shenanigans map is their all-out assault on parking lots bordering trailheads in the Mineral King Valley, one of the wildest parts of the park. Here, marmots crawl inside vehicles to chew hoses and lap up fluid, sometimes disabling cars. One unlucky hiker paid more than $1,000 for a tow down the narrow mountain road after a marmot attack. U.S. in talks for stake in Venezuela oil. By Colin Eaton. The Trump administration is in advanced talks with Venezuela for the U.S. to take a direct stake in more than a dozen oil fields that house nearly one-third of the country's massive energy reserves. If the countries reach a deal, it could pave the way for independent U.S. energy producers to become involved in oil production in the Latin American country, according to people familiar with the matter. Deals are still being worked out, and the deal could fall apart, these people said. Axios reported on the talks earlier Thursday. The deal would give the U.S. a foothold in at least 17 of Venezuela's most promising oil and gas fields, housing some 90 billion barrels of proven reserves, almost twice that of the U.S. Venezuela says it has 300 billion barrels of proven reserves, the largest in the world. Some of the details the U.S. and Venezuela are still working out include whether the U.S. would create joint ventures with private companies or whether the U.S. would hire companies to work the oil fields, according to one of the people. The U.S. deal would act to reassure American companies that are on the fence about gambling capital on the country's oil industry. The sector has fallen into widespread disarray following years of mismanagement during the regimes of the late Hugo Chavez and former President Nicolas Maduro. Although talks are continuing, major U.S. oil companies have yet to make any new investment in Venezuela since the U.S. ousted Maduro in January. The country's oil production has been slow to ramp up. It is pumping about 1.1 million barrels a day, roughly in line with last year's figures. A deal would also shore up energy security in the Western Hemisphere when the Iran war has locked a big portion of the world's oil and gas behind the Strait of Hormuz waterway. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, would Putin really tangle with NATO? He may calculate that Trump wouldn't help Europe in a crisis. CIA Director John Radcliffe landed in Moscow on a C-17 this week, and administration officials have been leaking the reason to warn Vladimir Putin not to attack countries in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Would Mr. Putin really risk a shooting war with the Western Alliance? Reason would suggest not, especially after how poorly his military has performed in Ukraine. Russia would be no match for NATO in a conventional conflict. I've had good talks with him, Mr. Trump said on Thursday. He's not going to be attacking a NATO territory. But the West has misjudged adversaries before, and Mr. Putin may have his own calculations that look different from inside the Kremlin. One might be that he could retrieve his Ukrainian debacle. He could still kill Ukrainian civilians from the skies, but his forces are gaining little territory at the estimated cost of 30,000 or so casualties a month. The Russian economy is struggling as Mr. Putin plows perhaps 10% of GDP into his military. There are signs of public disenchantment at home. What if Mr. Putin staged a lightning raid, say, to snatch territory in one of the Baltic states? Would NATO respond with force? If not, Mr. Putin would be able to achieve a long-time goal of exposing the alliance as weak and regain some political stature at home. He has already been testing NATO with so-called gray zone warfare that probes for weakness but stops short of actual conflict. A July report from the International Institute for Strategic Studies says Russia has used shadow ships to launch drones across Europe, including in Germany, France, the UK, and Denmark. Cyber attacks are common, and undersea cables have been sabotaged. NATO has responded with little beyond protest and scrambled jets. Mr. Putin may also think he can crack the alliance before Europe is able to rearm with higher defense spending. He might be willing to gamble that Mr. Putin would refuse to help Europe in a crisis. The U.S. has been threatening to withdraw U.S. troops from Europe and lecturing allies that the continent is largely their own problem. Mr. Trump boasts that Mr. Putin would never have invaded Ukraine on his watch, and he was right in the first term. But Mr. Putin may see Mr. Trump's courtship of the Russian and his reluctance to help Ukraine as signs of weakness. Mr. Putin could also be deploying threats to get Mr. Trump and NATO to jam Ukraine into a bad peace, though Kyiv is unlikely to go along. Mr. Trump's struggles in Iran may have put U.S. deterrence back in doubt. Mr. Putin is watching the United States ration munitions after mere weeks of battle with its third largest adversary. The midterm elections are coming, and Mr. Trump doesn't want the chaos a European crisis would bring. No one should underestimate that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea may also be working together to expose Western vulnerability at the current moment. Mr. Radcliffe appears to have told Moscow to stop aiding Iran, which is welcome but won't happen. Chinese President Xi Jinping probably doesn't want a crisis on the eve of his September trip to Washington, but you never know. The U.S. clearly sees a Russian incursion as a serious enough possibility to send Mr. Radcliffe, and let's hope a strong message was delivered. But the last known CIA chief to visit, William Burns, in 2021, warned Mr. Putin not to invade Ukraine. The conventional wisdom then was that Mr. Putin would limit himself to a hybrid war. Instead, he gambled on an invasion to capture Kyiv. The question of the moment is whether Mr. Trump's ability to deter adversaries is as formidable as he suggests. If Mr. Putin is toying with provoking NATO, Mr. Trump could show resolve by loudly canceling troop withdrawals from Europe and signaling more support for Ukraine and NATO's front lines. If U.S. deterrence fails again against Russia, Mr. Trump won't have Joe Biden to blame, and his presidency will be at risk. The Media's Lawfare Enabling by Kimberly A. Strassel. The Supreme Court last week allowed Donald Trump's ballroom construction to proceed, eliciting shock from the press corps. The court on Monday allowed the president's mail-in voting order to continue, eliciting the same shock. This follows the shock after Trump administration wins on immigration enforcement, personnel firings, DEI, and transgender orders, and dozens of other issues. How long is the public meant to treat the press's pearl clutching as genuine, rather than part of a campaign to undermine the administration and the credibility of the High Court? The state of legal reporting has reached peak national embarrassment, a master class in fiction that rivals the reporting about Russia collusion with Joe Biden's undiminished capacity. The media's contribution to lawfare began in the earliest days of the first Trump term and has become only more brazen. The swings and misses are there for all to see every day. Yet the formula is now so routine that nobody pushes back. It works like this. The administration takes an action that offends liberal sensibilities. Interest groups rush to litigate, sometimes with pre-packaged lawsuits. The press quotes liberal law professors and the litigators themselves as to why the suits are worthy. A liberal judge issues an injunction, which is treated as further proof of a lawsuit's merit. The stories omit any critical analysis of standing, jurisdiction, merits, or precedent. When a higher court corrects the legal overreach, the media, rather than acknowledge it got it wrong, insists the judges are in the tank for Mr. Trump. Consider the ballroom case. When the National Trust for Historic Preservation filed a lawsuit last December to halt the project, The press corps pushed the litigation as a slam dunk. The stories all led with a quote from the suit presenting as fact that no president is legally allowed to tear down portions of the White House without any review whatsoever. The pieces cataloged the laws the administration has supposedly violated and the claim that any building required the express authority of Congress. Critics hailed the early August ruling by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit to halt the project as evidence of the trust's legal firepower. Chief Justice John Roberts' order last Friday stating that injunction wasn't accompanied by an opinion and isn't a ruling on the merits, but any reporter with a half-sharp pencil might have reported the potentially fatal problems with this suit. These were nimbly outlined by Judge Naomi Rao, who dissented from the D.C. Circuit's injunction. She argues the trust has no standing to bring the suit. It wasn't chartered to look after the White House, and its one member who occasionally walks past the complex and expects to dislike the new structure can hardly claim a concrete injury. Judge Rao also makes a persuasive case on the merits, noting that the trust ultra vires claim that the administration is acting in obvious excess of its powers is essentially a Hail Mary pass, since at least one federal law authorizes the president to use funds for the care, maintenance, repair, alteration, and improvement of the executive residence. The courts will decide the merits, but it's ludicrous that the country's ace legal reporters never provided the public even an inkling of these legal defects. It's much more fun, as numerous stories about last week's order did, to suggest slyly that the Chief Justice is doing a personal favor for the president. This is the cynical game, jerry-rigged reporting to give life to lawfare and to set false expectations, the better to smear legal grown-ups. How unrelenting were we told Mr. Trump's 2017 travel ban would never stand, that there was no such thing as presidential immunity, that of course a president can't fire independent agency heads. That's the administration's firings and DEI rules and immigration actions all offended the law. How do we know this misreporting is intentional? Don't expect it to end, since the tactics continue to work for the left. The real scandal is the press's role. This has been a reading of the August 28th issue of the Wall Street Journal by Corrine. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful weekend.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the Buffalo Criterion. At 8 o'clock, we have the New York Times. And at 9 o'clock, we have Discover Magazine. Stay with us for these readings and more. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which